95% according to the polls. And then after the massacre, 65% of Israelis who were polled said it should have gone on longer until Hamas was deposed. Now, some of you might think, well, the Israelis don't really know what happened in Gaza. That's not really very plausible. Israel has a citizen army. And so its soldiers, they were there, and they came back and they told their families what they saw. So it's not really very plausible to say they didn't know what was happening. So I think the issue is not so much what's being concealed from Israelis as how much is known, and they don't care.
Thank you, Dr. Finkelstein, for the presentation. A couple of us came all the way down from Gainesville just to attend the presentation, and we hope we would be able to attend or to visit UF next year probably. Maybe we can coordinate that with you at the end of the presentation. I have two questions for you. The first one is about a very interesting video that we saw.
We talk too fast.
Okay. I have two questions for you. The first one is related to an interesting video we have seen from Senator Kucinek at the end of the Gaza massacre. He was stating that U.S. military, or like U.S. weapons, American weapons, were used to an escalation of violence and against the civilian population, and that he was intending to ask the Congress to investigate on that because it was unconstitutional to do such things. Do you have any information about what happened with that investigation, or if it did start even? That would be my first question. My second question would be related to what happened in Dubai. We have seen that the Mossad executed a Hamas member using passports from foreign countries, Australia, France, Britain, and others. And I still have to hear a statement from the governments whose passports have been used condemning Mossad for doing what they've done. Do you think we have moved to another level of leniency towards Israel and Mossad, or is it something that might change? Thank you very much.
Okay, those are two important questions. The first question, and we should bear it in mind, every single white phosphorus shell, every single one that was used in Gaza was made in the United States. That's just a fact. Every single shell of that white phosphorus was made, manufactured in the United States. Number two, Amnesty International put out a report entitled Fueling Conflict, and it called for a comprehensive total arms embargo on Israel and Hamas. Hamas makes no difference because they have firecrackers and Roman candles. But in the case of Israel, it's quite serious. And then Amnesty International said three things, each of which we should attend to. Number one, Amnesty said, as everybody here knows, that the United States is by far and away the chief arms supplier for Israel. Number two, as the questioner pointed out, Amnesty International said under international law, as well as domestic American law, it's illegal to transfer weapons to a country which is a consistent violator of human rights. And so Amnesty said it's illegal for the U.S. to pass weapons to Israel because Israel is a consistent violator of human rights. And number three, using very stark language, Amnesty said what happened in Gaza could not have happened were it not for, and this is its own phrase, were it not for U.S. taxpayer money. That's what they said. You're appalled by what happened in Gaza? Or I should say, we're appalled by what happened but we made it happen. It could not have happened without U.S. taxpayer money. That's what Amnesty concluded. On the second question, Israel almost certainly, you can't say with 100% certainty, but almost certainly murdered a Hamas, a senior Hamas member in Dubai, and they used all of these fake passports from the British, from the Germans, and so forth. And the question that was raised was, why haven't we heard more denunciations from those governments? There was some denunciation. I mean, we should be clear about that. There was some repercussions in Germany, there were some repercussions in Great Britain. I think the important point, however, is that there's now opened up a very large divide between what governments are saying and doing and what the general population believes. So, for example, the German government is almost absurd, in fact it is absurd, in its embrace of Israel, the current Chancellor, Ms. Merkel. But German public opinion has turned sharply against Israeli policy. And you see the same phenomenon all across Europe. Israel still has solid governmental support, but its public support is rapidly vanishing. And you can see that, the beginnings of that happening here as well, where, for example, support for Israel in the Democratic Party is very weak now. From those, I should rephrase that, from those who vote Democratic. But, of course, at the party level, the governmental level, it still remains very strong. And that means our challenge is a very straightforward one. We have to turn public opinion into a political force. That's our challenge now. Public opinion is highly critical of what Israel is doing, but at the political level, the level of governments, Israel still commands a lot of support. And so we have to, especially those societies which call themselves democratic, we have to turn the public support into a political force, and that remains to be done.
Two questions, sir. First question, did Dershowitz ever pay you that $10,000 he owes you? And on a more serious note, do you think the one-state plan is gaining momentum? Or do you think both the one-state and two-state solution are not going to work and we're just stuck with the status quo?
On the first question, the likelihood of extracting a dime from Professor Dershowitz, the proverbial trying to get blood from a stone, so we won't even go there. Not that I really want the money. On the second question, for those of you who aren't familiar with the sort of the technicalities of the Israel-Palestine conflict, the international consensus for resolving the conflict is for there to be a full Israeli withdrawal from the territories it occupied in June 1967, which means the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. The right of the Palestinians to exercise self-determination and create a state in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. Mutual recognition between the Israeli state and the Palestinian state. Recognition between the Israeli state and the neighboring Arab states. And a resolution of the refugee question. Namely, there were several hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, the estimates generally put about 750, who were expelled in 1948 when Israel was created. And then there